The human was already moving before the first explosion, which meant either it had predicted the attack, or it simply moved like that all the time. Seth Kai pressed herself into the corridor alcove as the deck plating lurched beneath her coils, her heat pit organs flaring white with the sudden bloom of combustion 2 sections aft, her scale crest snapping upright along her spine in a response she had not chosen. The emergency lighting came on in the deep amber her species had long ago persuaded human station designers to use, a small diplomatic courtesy, largely forgotten by the humans who lived under it. And in that amber light, Seth Kai ran the calculation she had been trained since hatching to run first. Assets available, assets at risk, probability of recovery, optimal exit vector. Exit vector, docking bay 7. Distance, 43 body lengths. Obstruction probability, moderate. Survival improvement, significant. She was already orienting toward docking bay 7 when Vasquez went past her in the other direction. Not walking, not running in the way most bipeds ran. That lurching controlled fall her species found aesthetically distressing. Moving. The word Seth Kai's translator offered was running, but it was inadequate. The human was a compact, dark shape in the amber light with a sidearm already drawn and a toolkit already unclipped from her belt, and the expression on her scarred face was not fear and not excitement and not anything Seth Kai had a clean category for. She moved the way a detonation moves. Directional. Committed. Past the point of revision. Seal the docking ring first, Vasquez said, not to Seth Kai, to a young crew member flattened against the opposite wall, hyperventilating. The young one stared. Docking ring. Now. Move. And the young one moved. Seth Kai noted, in the part of her mind that cataloged anomalous behaviors for later diplomatic analysis, that the human crew member had not responded to the emergency lighting or the explosion or the alarm that was now cycling through its third repetition. The crew member had responded to Vasquez's voice. She noted this. Then the second explosion hit, and the corridor groaned in a way that Seth Kai's magnetic perception registered as something tearing in the station's structural frame. Not hull, not yet, but close, and her scale crest went fully erect for the first time since her second molt, and she became very aware of the cold recycled air and the smell of burning polymer from somewhere forward and the distant sound of atmosphere being somewhere was not supposed to be. Exit vector. Docking bay 7. She moved. She got 12 body lengths before the third explosion. The deck tilted. Seth Kai's coils found purchase on an equipment rack, and she steadied herself against the lurch, sensors flaring. The magnetic signature of the station's core had shifted, which meant the structural tear was worsening, which meant the calculations she had run 6 seconds ago were already obsolete. She ran them again. New exit vector. Docking bay 4, longer route, obstruction probability, now high due to. The sound was specific. Seth Kai's species had evolved in a world with few sudden noises, and the sounds it lacked preparation for tended to lodge in the heat-sensing organs and pulse there long after the source was gone. The sound she heard now was atmosphere, station atmosphere, the pressurized mix that kept organic life functional. Being forced through a gap it was not meant to enter, and beneath it a lower sound that her translator flagged as structural compromise, catastrophic class. Section breach. Docking ring corridor. Where Vasquez had gone. Seth Kai ran the probability. What a rational being did next was continue toward docking bay 4. She turned back. She did not fully understand the mechanism of that turn. Her cost assessment framework had no column for it. She logged it as navigational error under stress and oriented toward the sound of tearing metal and the white bloom of heat in her pit organs that meant plasma. Cutting torch, not weapon, and she found Vasquez in a corridor that was venting. Not badly. Not yet. A seam along the outer wall, perhaps the length of Seth Kai's forearm, through which the station's air was leaking with a high thin sound that vibrated in Seth Kai's auditory membranes unpleasantly. The emergency door at the corridor's end had sealed, which meant the section was self-contained, which meant the venting would equalize the pressure slowly rather than catastrophically, which meant there were perhaps 400 of the time units Seth Kai used. Her species measured time in SEKVF, roughly the duration of a single ventilation cycle. before the air in this corridor became insufficient for large oxygen-dependent mammals. Vasquez was standing at the docking ring manual override panel, not trying to open it, trying to seal it. She was on the inside of the ring. Seth Kai's crests went flat, then shot upright again in the involuntary oscillation her species called Kelvrath, the shudder that preceded a classification failure. The docking ring was the primary attachment point for everything that had been docked to the station when the attack began. 3 were haulers, a Vethrani diplomatic courier. Seth Kai's own ship, she registered with something that her translator declined to name, a consortium cargo barge. If the ring released under bombardment, every docked vessel would become projectiles against the station's hull within a very short period. Vasquez was sealing it. From the inside, in a corridor that was venting, "You have 400 sikaveth of breathable atmosphere," Seth Kai said, because information was useful and she did not know what else to offer. For minutes, Vasquez said, not looking up, "Yeah, should be enough." The override panel was not designed for unassisted manual operation. It required 112 kilograms of torque to complete the seal, according to the engineering specifications Seth Kai had memorized when she first came aboard, because she memorized things like that. Vasquez weighed approximately 73 kilograms. Seth Kai knew this because she had looked, because she looked at things like that. The panel made a sound like a system registering an error. Vasquez put her shoulder against the lever, braced her feet on the corridor wall behind her, and applied every kilogram she had to the problem. The sound changed. Lower. Something giving way, but in the correct direction. Seth Kai became aware, distantly, that she was watching the patch of dried coolant on the human's boot heel. It was gray-brown against the dark material. It had been applied in 2 strokes, in the kind of hasty repair gesture that left asymmetric coverage. Someone had spilled coolant and cleaned it imperfectly and then gone on with their day. Seth Kai counted the strokes. 2. The left one slightly longer than the right. The docking ring sealed with a sound that registered on all 4 of Seth Kai's active auditory membranes at once. Vasquez stayed braced for another 2 full ventilation cycles after the seal completed, as if she needed to be certain the station believed her, before she straightened, flexed her hands, checked the panel readout, and said, "Okay." The corridor had perhaps 320 SCKVeth of usable atmosphere remaining. "We should move," Seth Kai said. "Yeah," Vasquez said. She picked up her sidearm from where she'd set it against the wall. She looked at Seth Kai with the flat brown eyes that Seth Kai's infrared reading rendered as steady, even warmth. No spike of adrenaline heat, no fear bloom, just a consistent temperature that somehow seemed more unsettling than a spike would have been. "You came back," Vasquez said. It was not a question. Seth Kai did not answer it. They moved. The sealed section they reached had 6 survivors, 2 human crew members, one of them injured, a Kethdara soldier who had been in transit custody, a Lethvari maintenance contractor whose species Seth Kai knew only by reputation, and a young Vethrani trainee, one of Seth Kai's own delegation, not yet through second molt. The trainee pressed immediately against Seth Kai's side, crest flat, releasing the distress musk of the very young. Seth Kai tolerated this. She was a senior diplomatic officer. She knew the protocols for distressed subordinates. She did not know the protocol for what the human was doing. Vasquez had gone directly to the injured crew member and was already running assessment, hands moving with the specific economy of someone who had done this in the dark before, probably had done it in worse than this. Pressure at the throat, then the chest, then the abdomen. Then she pulled a kit from her belt that was not a standard medical kit, because standard medical kits did not get this repaired and re-repaired and repaired again until they were more patched than original. And she started working. She worked on the human crew member first. This was the highest probability of survival and the highest resource efficiency, so it was the correct choice, and Seth Kai's framework noted this approvingly, and then watched Vasquez move to the Lethvari contractor and felt the approval becoming complicated. The Lethvari had 3 broken structural limbs and a seal failure in the suit-equivalent membrane they used for atmospheric regulation. Vasquez assessed, improvised a brace from conduit she pulled out of a wall panel without ceremony, and sealed the membrane with something from the kit that was clearly not rated for Lethvari biochemistry, but was the available option. The Lethvari made a sound Seth Kai's translator rendered as gratitude, extreme. Vasquez had already moved to the Kethdara. Seth Kai's crests went flat. The Kethdara were the attacking force. The fleet outside that was currently bombarding the station to structural failure was a Kethdara fleet. The soldier in transit custody was Kethdara. He was injured, one shoulder dislocated with visible deformity, one gash across the upper chest sealed by his own pressure suit's emergency systems, but clearly painful, and Vasquez was moving toward him with the same kit and the same economy of movement, and Seth Kai ran the calculation before she could stop herself. Resources limited. This entity is enemy designated. Resource expenditure has negative strategic value. You don't have to, the Kethdara said. His translator was running slow, syllables slightly behind his jaw movements. My fleet will. Your fleet is the one shooting at us, Vasquez said. She did not say it with heat. She said it the way she said everything, which was as a statement of logistical fact. Shoulder. A pause. The Kethdara's four eyes, arranged for forward threat detection in a way Seth Kai had always found aesthetically aggressive, moved to Vasquez's face and found something there that Seth Kai, watching, could not name from any angle. Yes, the Kethdara said. This is going to hurt. She reset the shoulder in one smooth motion. The Kethdara made a sound that went above and below the frequencies Seth Kai's translator handled, something in the register of extreme pain, and then the sound stopped. Vasquez had put one hand flat on the Kethdara's arm and was applying pressure, not medical pressure, not the diagnostic kind. Just contact. Steady. Present. 2 taps, then her hand remained. Seth Kai filed this behavior under anomalous social gesture, biped class. She moved the file to unclassified. She moved it again to review pending. She had been watching the human's hand on the Kethdara's arm for longer than she'd intended. 2 taps, and then the hand staying. 2 taps. From somewhere in the kit, Vasquez had produced a foil-sealed package, and she was opening it with her teeth, and whatever it contained smelled of something that Seth Kai's chemical sensors flagged as organic compound, high-entropy decomposition. She ate it without hesitation or change of expression. Lunch, Vasquez said, to no one, or possibly to everyone, and continued her assessment of the sealed section's structural integrity as if she were doing inventory. The Kethdara was watching her with all 4 eyes. He gave Seth Kai the fleet's current bombardment pattern an hour later. Not the station's tactical team, not the relief frequency. He angled himself toward Vasquez, and he said, the next volley will target the lower junction. They want to separate the docking ring from the core before they breach. Vasquez said, how long? 40 rotations. Okay, Vasquez said, and started making plans. Seth Kai made a note in the diplomatic observation log she was keeping in her secondary consciousness, the one she always ran during high-stakes situations. She wrote, Kethdara asset transferred tactical intelligence to human security officer. No coercion. No negociación. No exchange of value noted. She stared at the note for a long time. She did not write what she was thinking because she did not yet have the words for it, and she had never, in 37 years of diplomatic service, encountered a thing she did not have the words for. She had one now. The lights had been out for 6 rotations when Seth Kai found the human in the dark. This was not entirely accurate. There was the glow of the structural integrity monitor, a pale blue-white that Seth Kai's heat pit organs rendered as cold and flat, and there was the thin red pulse of the emergency air recycler doing its work. And with these 2 sources, the corridor was not truly dark so much as it existed in a kind of visual debt, shapes present but only barely paying what they owed. Vasquez was crouched at the far end of the corridor with her plasma cutter set to the lowest functional output, a setting Seth Kai had not known the device possessed, and she was drawing on the wall. Seth Kai stopped 12 body lengths away and watched. The human's back was to her. She could see the movement of the arm, precise, deliberate, nothing like the free, gestural motions that bipeds use for communication. This was controlled, effortful, the arm moving with the patience of someone doing a thing that mattered. The plasma cutter's glow lit the left side of Vasquez's face in pale orange. The scar tissue caught the light differently than the rest of her skin, smoother, reflective. Seth Kai moved closer. The drawing was a face, not a diagram, not a map, though she had drawn maps earlier. The corridor grid, the structural integrity failure points, the bombardment angle calculations laid out in a grid that Seth Kai had thought, initially, was the purpose of the plasma cutter's new application. The face was not those things. The face was a man. Seth Kai had seen him twice, once at shift change and once in the corridor just before the attack, one of the crew members who had not made it to the sealed section. He had been in Docking Ring Junction 7 when it went. Vasquez was drawing him from memory, in detail. In the near dark, with a tool that cost energy they did not have much of, working with the careful slowness of someone who intended to get it right. Seth Kai's species had a word, Vethsoral. It meant the rational accounting of debts to the gone, the process of tallying what a lost resource had provided, acknowledging the deficit, and closing the ledger. You marked the loss. You allocated replacement value where possible. You moved to the next entry. Every species she had encountered had an equivalent practice. The Kethdara burned the name. The Lethvari returned the body to the nutrient cycle and spoke the contribution aloud. The consortium filed a productivity report, which she had always found cold but at least understood the logic of. She watched Vasquez draw the line of the man's jaw. The small detail of a small scar on his chin that Seth Kai had not consciously noticed until she saw it reproduced here in pale orange light, and understood that Vasquez had noticed it, had filed it, had carried it, and was now not closing the ledger. The opposite, refusing to close it, keeping it open, burning charge to keep it open, drawing it on a wall where it would exist past the keeping of it in memory alone. This was not Vethsoral. Seth Kai did not have a word for what it was. She became aware that her crests were fully raised, had been raised, she thought, for the entire time she had been watching, though she had no memory of raising them. She caught her reflection in the polished section of wall panel beside the drawing, and the pale blue-white monitor light showed her own crest ridge in full display. The scales darkened with the blood flush that meant threat response, maximum in her species' biological vocabulary, and she had not known she was doing it. She looked away from her reflection. Vasquez finished the face. She sat back on her heels and looked at it for one full ventilation cycle, Seth Kai counted, and then she reached out and touched it with 2 fingers, not tracing, just touching, the way you confirm a thing is real and present and yours. She picked up her weapon and walked back to her post. The plasma cutter charge log would show the expenditure in the next resource audit. Seth Kai would note it. She would file it. She would not know what category to put it in. She came back an hour later in the pale dark and looked at the face on the wall for a long time. She was not sure what she was doing. She did not file an entry for the action. The Kethdara fleet had stopped trying to breach the station and started trying to collapse it, which Seth Kai's model said was strategically the correct decision. She presented the analysis to Vasquez in the same measured, precise language she used for all her diplomatic briefings, because that was the tool she had, and she used the tool she had. 37 rotations remaining, at current bombardment rate. Structural failure would begin at the lower junction and propagate upward through the central corridor spine. Emergency bulkheads would buy an additional 4 to 7 rotations before the sealed section itself became uninhabitable. Survival probability at current resource and personnel levels, 3.7%. The math was not ambiguous. She had run it 4 times. Vasquez listened to all of it without interrupting, which was something Seth Kai had noticed humans did differently from most species. Most species interrupted when they had processed enough information to respond. Humans seemed to wait until the information was finished before processing began, which created a pause after speech that other species sometimes found distressing and Seth Kai found, now, oddly steadying. Okay, Vasquez said. Seth Kai waited. Right, Vasquez said. She turned to the crew members assembled in the corridor. 2 humans, 1 Lethvari, 1 Kethdara, and she said, here's what we have. 37 rotations, 3.7% survival odds, one partially functional weapons console in this section, and approximately enough material to fortify 2 of the 4 approach corridors before the next major strike. The Lethvari contractor made a soft sound of distress. One of the human crew members, younger, who had been showing the physiological indicators of high sustained fear since the first explosion, went very still. "So," Vasquez said, "here's what we're going to do." Seth Kai had the calculation in her secondary consciousness, already current. Optimum use of 37 rotations equals maximize single individual survival probability through selective prioritization. Recommend. Fortify escape vector rather than defense positions. Rationale. Defense extends station survival by estimated 9 rotations, but reduces individual survival probability by. "We're going to hold this section," Vasquez said. Seth Kai waited again, in case there was a second part of the sentence. There was not. "The math," she began. "The math is right," Vasquez said. Not arguing. Acknowledging. "The math is right, and we're still not leaving." She said it the way she said everything as a logistical fact, and the logistical fact was that 3.7% was not 0%, and apparently for a human that was not the same thing as 0%, and Seth Kai stood in the amber emergency light and felt the scale crests along her spine lift until they were as high as her biology allowed them to go, and the stress musk she released was strong enough that the young Vethrani trainee stirred and pressed against her again, distressed by distress. The Kethdara prisoner said, "I will help." No one asked him why. Vasquez nodded once, the short, decisive nod that Seth Kai had catalogued as her primary signal for information received, action proceeding. The Kethdara moved to the weapons console, and Vasquez moved to the barricade materials, and the young human crew member with the fear response moved to help her, and the Lethvari, with 3 broken structural limbs and a sealed membrane, moved to the monitoring station because that was what was available. Seth Kai stood in the corridor with the Vethrani trainee's warmth against her coils, and the musk still in the air, and the specific, measurable knowledge that she was looking at a group of beings constructing a defense with a 3.7% chance of matching. "You doing okay?" She brought her sensory organs to bear on Vasquez, who had turned from the barricade, and was looking directly at Seth Kai with the flat brown eyes that her infrared reading showed as steady, even warmth, that consistent, unspiked temperature. And the question was genuine, and it was directed at Seth Kai, who was not a crew member, who was not in Vasquez's chain of responsibility, who was a Vethrani diplomatic officer, and therefore not in any category that would prompt a human security chief to pause in the middle of fortifying a doomed position and ask if she was okay. Seth Kai's secondary consciousness offered several possible responses from her diplomatic training, ranging from affirmative, "Thank you for inquiry," to the various species-appropriate acknowledgement phrases. "I don't know," she said, because it was true. Vasquez looked at her for one full ventilation cycle. The scarred side of her face caught the amber light. She nodded, not the decisive nod, a different one, slower, that Seth Kai had not catalogued before. Then she turned back to the barricade. Seth Kai looked at the dead crew member's sidearm and its holster on the wall rack, placed there when he had not come back, and Vasquez had quietly collected what he'd left. The weapon was a standard-issue human sidearm, grip worn smooth at the contact points, which meant it had been held a great deal, which meant its owner had carried it habitually, which meant there was a particular indentation at the grip's forward edge where a thumb had rested for many hundreds of hours. She had been looking at it for longer than she intended. She picked it up. It was heavier in her coils than she had expected. Her species did not have hands in the gripping sense. She had to adapt her grip to use the weapon at all, coiling it into the secondary manipulator arrangement she used for precise work. The weight was approximately 1,200 grams. She had the exact figure from the engineering specifications she had memorized when she came aboard. She didn't know why she was holding it. She did not put it down. Vasquez, from across the corridor, without turning from the barricade, said, "Safety's on the left side. Slide it forward." And that was all. The relief fleet arrived 17 rotations early, which should have been impossible. And later Seth Kai learned that a human had flown a messenger drone through a debris field that killed the drone, and should have killed the human and had apparently considered this a fair trade. The human in question was the young crew member, not Vasquez, the other one, the one who had shown high sustained fear since the first explosion, who had run the drone bay alone in the station's earliest damaged hours, and had manually flown a messenger unit through the Kefdara intercept screen on minimum signature, losing the drone to an intercept at the last moment, but with the message already transmitted. Seth Kai found this out later in the debrief and filed it in a new category she had created recently. The category had no name yet. She was working on it. The relief fleet entered the system with a specific quality of force that Seth Kai's magnetic perception registered as many ships, moving with intent. The Kefdara fleet received a communication. She saw the response in the sensor data afterward, and began its withdrawal with the efficiency of a force that had gotten what it came for, or had decided that what it came for had changed value. The bombardment stopped at rotation 21. In the sealed section, silence registered first as a diagnostic error. The constant percussion of structural strikes had become the ambient rhythm of their existence, and its absence created something that Seth Kai's translator described as quiet, and her body registered as wrong. The Lethvari contractor made a sound. The young Vethrani trainee's crests went flat in what Seth Kai recognized as the physical expression of spent adrenaline. The Kefdara stood at the weapons console with all four eyes fixed on the external sensor feed, and his jaw moving with the specific rhythm that Seth Kai's long diplomatic experience identified as prayer or something close enough that the category held. Vasquez said, "Stand down. All of you. Rest now." She said it the way she said everything. Logistical fact. The emergency was over. Rest was the next operational requirement. She went to the structural integrity monitor and stood there for a long time looking at numbers, and then she sat down with her back against the wall, and Seth Kai watched the specific quality of the human's body change as she sat, a kind of release like a material returning to its resting state after sustained tension load, something she had been maintaining through 40-odd rotations of continuous operation finally being set down. The relief team's advance unit reached the sealed section 13 rotations later. They cut through the emergency bulkhead with equipment that cost approximately as much as one of the haulers that had been docked here when this began, and they came in with medics and light, and the smell of unrecycled atmosphere that hit Seth Kai's chemical sensors was something her translator declined to file under any useful category. The human crew member with the fear response was out first, helped by two relief medics, not resisting, crying in the particular way that Seth Kai had observed humans do when they were safe. Not when they were in danger, but after, as if the body had been storing the response for a more convenient moment. The Lethvari contractor moved under their own power, slowly, with the dignity of something that had decided it would not accept assistance. The young Vethrani trainee pressed against Seth Kai's side, and Seth Kai moved with them toward the light. The Kefdara stepped forward and addressed the relief fleet commander in the rapid, compressed syntax of formal surrender, which Seth Kai recognized because she had heard it before. He named himself. He named his unit. He named his status. Then, he said a thing that was outside the formal syntax, and Seth Kai's translator took a moment longer than usual to render it, as if uncertain of the framing. He said, "I am surrendering to the officer in charge of the surviving section. Her name is Vasquez." The relief fleet commander looked at Vasquez. Vasquez, from somewhere behind Seth Kai, said, "That works." They were bringing her out on a stretcher when Seth Kai turned back. She had not meant to turn back. She had been moving toward the light with the trainee and the cool, unrecycled air, but she turned, and Vasquez was being carried horizontal by two medics with the brisk efficiency of people who had stopped arguing with their patient about walking and had made a unilateral logistical decision. Vasquez's eyes were open. She was looking at the ceiling. Then, she was looking at Seth Kai. "You stayed," Vasquez said. Not accusation. Not gratitude. Something in between those things, or past them. The same quality as the nod in the corridor, the slow one that Seth Kai had not cataloged before, though she was cataloging it now. Seth Kai did not have an answer that fit the question. Her diplomatic training offered several. All of them felt like lying, though they were technically accurate. She did not answer. She was still holding the weapon. She had not put it down. She did not know when she would. The official report she was required to file to the Vethrani Diplomatic Corps was 37 fields long, and Seth Kai had been a senior diplomatic officer for 19 years, and she had filed reports in emergency conditions before. She had filed them in boarding actions and first contact failures and twice during active species extinction events, and none of those reports had taken her as long as this one. The difficulty was Field 14, Assessment of Human, Homo sapiens, Tactical Behavior, classified per Standard Threat/Asset Matrix. She had been looking at Field 14 for approximately the duration of 6 ventilation cycles. She typed, Human Vasquez displayed tactical behavior inconsistent with survival optimization, including, she deleted inconsistent with survival optimization. She typed, Human Vasquez displayed tactical behavior that, she deleted that. She typed, Human Vasquez. She looked at the weapon, still coiled in her secondary manipulators. The weight of it, 1,200 grams. The thumb-worn indentation at the grip's forward edge, the mark of a person who had carried this thing for a long time and would not carry it anymore. She thought about the face on the wall, whether it was still there or whether the station's repair crews had already smoothed over it with their efficiency and their project timelines, whether someone had noted it in a damage log, whether it would be categorized under non-structural markings, incidental, and buffed away with everything else that the battle had left. She thought about 2 taps on a Kethdar soldier's arm. She thought about 3.7% and a nod. She thought about, you stayed. Field 14. Cursor blinking. She wrote, Human Vasquez's tactical behavior cannot be assessed under current matrix parameters. Homo sapiens do not optimize for survival in the manner other assessed species do. They optimize for something else. Current Vethrani frameworks do not have a field for it. She stopped. She wrote the rest of the report. Fields 15 through 37, all accurate, all precise, all the things she had observed and could name. She wrote the bombardment data and the structural failure timeline and the role of the Kethdar prisoner in providing tactical intelligence and the role of the human crew member in dispatching the messenger drone. She wrote all of it with the precision she had trained for and the language she had been given. Then she reached the final field recommendation. She typed, all prior Vethrani threat assessments of Homo sapiens be reviewed and reclassified at the highest available category. She sent the report. Then she opened the personal notation file that was encrypted and would not be read by the Corps. The file she used for the observation she didn't yet have the diplomatic language for, the one she came back to later when the language arrived. She wrote, Vethsoral. She looked at it. She crossed it out. Humans did not do Vethsoral. They did the thing she had watched in the near dark with the plasma cutter burning charge that they could not spare. They kept the ledger open. They drew the face. They touched it. They moved back to their post. They did not accept correct losses as closed. They refused the entire framework of correct losses. They carried the gone as something that was still owed, still present, still worth the charge. Seth Kai did not have a word for that. She thought that might be the point. She sat for a long time with a weapon in her coils, and the cursor blinking in the empty space after the crossed-out word, and then she wrote, in the small, precise notation script she had learned before she could speak, begin new classification. She did not yet know what to call it. She thought she might need to spend more time around humans before she did. This prospect, she noted, did not distress her as much as it should have. The interior of a deep space trading station corridor bathed in deep amber emergency lighting, the air hazy with venting polymer smoke. A large serpentine alien, the Vethrani diplomat Seth Kai, with iridescent green-black scales, a prominent raised crest ridge along her spine, heat pit organ slits flanking a narrow triangular head, and coils filling the corridor alcove, presses herself against the wall as the station shudders from an unseen explosion. Her scale crests are fully erect with alarm. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The same amber-lit corridor in the moments after the first strike. A compact human woman, Vasquez, dark-skinned, short hair, a scar running from her left cheekbone to jaw, wearing a worn station security uniform with a sidearm already drawn, and A multi-toolkit unclipped from her belt, moves past the frame in a blur of purposeful motion. Her expression is not fear. In the background, the serpentine Vethrani diplomat watches, scale crests raised. Her heat pit slits bright with the infrared bloom of distant fire. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A young human crew member slammed against a corridor wall, wide-eyed and hyperventilating in the amber emergency glow, the station alarms cycling overhead. The compact, scarred human woman Vasquez stands before him, face calm and direct, pointing down the corridor. Her sidearm is holstered. The young crew member's body language shifts mid-frame, from frozen to moving. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The station corridor buckles. Deck plating warps upward at an angle as a second explosion hits. The large iridescent, serpentine alien Seth Kai grips an equipment rack with her lower coils to stay upright, her crest ridge vibrating. Sparks cascade from a conduit overhead. The amber emergency lighting flickers. Through a viewport at the end of the corridor, distant weapon fire illuminates the void in white-blue pulses. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A third explosion tilts the corridor. The serpentine diplomat Seth Kai, scales shimmering green-black in flickering amber light, clings to the equipment rack as the station lists. Her heat pit organs are wide and bright, processing the thermal bloom of multiple fires. Her scale crests oscillate, flat then, erect, in rapid involuntary sequence. The magnetic signature distortion of a compromised structural frame is suggested by slight warping of the corridor geometry. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A narrow station corridor near the docking ring. Outer walls seem cracked and venting atmosphere with a thin visible mist. Emergency door sealed at the far end traps the section. The compact human woman Vasquez stands at a heavy manual override panel, her back to the viewer, shoulder pressed against a large lever. Her feet are braced against the opposite wall. The corridor is partially evacuating. Loose debris drifts toward the breach seam. The serpentine Vethrani alien watches from 12 body lengths back, crests fully raised. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on Vasquez at the manual override panel in the venting corridor. Her face is lit from below by the panel's emergency indicator lights. Orange and red, expression set, focused, not afraid. Sweat and exertion visible. Behind her, the thin mist of venting atmosphere catches the amber light. The lever is beginning to move. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The serpentine diplomat Seth Kai in the venting corridor, mid-shot, staring down at a patch of dried gray-brown coolant on the human's boot heel. The boot is visible at the bottom of the frame, the human's body above it straining at a lever. Seth Kai's triangular head is angled downward with disproportionate attention. Her heat pit organs are focused on that small patch. The corridor continues to vent in the background. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The docking ring seals. The heavy manual override panel shows a green confirmation light in the amber-lit corridor. Vasquez is still braced against the lever, arms shaking, not yet releasing. The venting mist has thinned. The serpentine Seth Kai watches from the corridor junction, crests finally dropping from full erect to mid-position. The atmospheric breach seam is still visible but stabilized. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez straightens from the lever, checks the panel readout, and rolls her shoulders. Her face is lit by the green confirmation light and the amber corridor glow. She picks up a sidearm she had set against the wall. She turns and looks at the serpentine Vethrani diplomat with flat brown eyes that register in infrared as steady, even warmth. No spike of fear heat. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A sealed emergency section of the station interior. Amber emergency lighting. 6 survivors assembled. 2 humans in worn station uniforms. 1 seated and injured, one standing, a four-eyed bipedal Keftar soldier in a crack pressure suit, his shoulder visibly dislocated. A Lethvari contractor with a segmented chitinous body and 3 broken structural limbs. The large serpentine Seth Kai with her scale crests elevated, and a small young Vethrani trainee, smaller and paler than Seth Kai, crests flat, pressing against the older alien's coils. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez kneeling beside an injured human crew member on the deck plating, applying triage with a heavily repaired medical kit. Patches of different colors covering the original case, replacement clasps mismatched. Her hands move with practiced economy across the crewman's chest and throat. The sealed section glows amber. The serpentine Seth Kai watches from a distance, crest ridge raised. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez working on the Lethvari contractor, a medium-sized alien with a segmented insectoid body, pale chitinous plates, and 3 limbs showing compound fractures. Vasquez is improvising a brace from conduit stripped from a wall panel, her multi-tool in hand. The Lethvari's remaining limbs are splayed for balance. The sealed section continues in the background with its amber light. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez approaching the Kefdara soldier, a bipedal alien with 4 forward-facing eyes and a wide flat face, gray-green scaled skin, his shoulder visibly displaced, and his pressure suit's emergency seal covering a chest wound. He sits against the wall, for eyes watching the human approach. The serpentine Seth Kai's scale crests are fully flattened, a different stress response, visible in the midground. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the Kefdara soldier's 4-eyed face as Vasquez resets his shoulder. His jaw is open, registering extreme pain, but his 4 eyes are fixed on something beyond the frame. Vasquez's face, with an expression of confused, involuntary trust. His gray-green scaled hands grip the deck plating. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez's hand flat on the Kefdara soldier's arm, applying steady pressure contact after setting the dislocated shoulder. Not medical examination pressure, just presence. The Kefdara has gone still, for eyes looking down at the hand. Vasquez's expression, matter of fact, looking already toward the next patient. In the background, the serpentine Seth Kai's triangular head is tilted, watching the hand. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez sitting cross-legged on the deck plating, opening a foil emergency ration package with her teeth. The contents look unappetizing under the amber light. She eats without expression. The 4 survivors watch her with varying degrees of confusion. The Kefdara's 4 eyes, the Lethvari's compound optical clusters, the young Vethrani trainee's pale crest ridge. Seth Kai has her secondary manipulators half-raised toward notation device she hasn't used. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Kefdara soldier, seated against the wall with his now-braced shoulder, watches Vasquez move to the section's structural monitoring station. His 4 eyes follow her, with the specific fixed quality of an apex predator species recalibrating a threat assessment. The amber light catches the 4 pupils equally. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The sealed section in dim amber light, later. The Kefdara soldier is now turned toward Vasquez, speaking in the measured compressed syntax of intelligence transfer. Vasquez listens without interrupting, head slightly tilted. The serpentine Seth Kai hovers at the periphery, one manipulator raised near her notation device, staring at the scene with her crest ridge oscillating in the pattern that signals classification failure. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The sealed section corridor in near total darkness. Only the pale blue-white glow of a structural integrity monitor in the background and the thin red pulse of an emergency air recycler. The serpentine Seth Kai moves slowly through the corridor, her heat pit organs providing the equivalent of night vision, showing warm patches, the human's position at the far end, against the cold metal walls. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez crouched at the far end of a dark corridor, a plasma cutter set to minimum output held in her right hand, its pale orange glow lighting the left side of her face. The scar tissue along her cheekbone catches the light differently, smoother, more reflective. Her back is partially to the viewer. Her arm moves with the slow, deliberate motion of someone doing precision work that matters. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the wall of the corridor in near dark. A face is being drawn with a plasma cutter on minimum. A human man, middle age, a small scar on his chin, rendered in fine detail for memory. The pale orange lines glow against the gray metal. The drawing is incomplete at the edges, but precise at the center, the face emerging from the wall as something between memory and portrait. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Serpentine Vethrani diplomat Seth Kai, iridescent green-black scales in the near dark, has stopped at the corridor midpoint and is observing Vasquez drawing on the wall. Seth Kai's triangular head is tilted at an angle her species uses for deep sensory analysis. Her scale crests are raised. She doesn't know it. One of her manipulators is pressed against a wall panel, and in the polished surface of the panel her own reflection shows, crests fully erect, blood-darkened. She is not looking at her reflection. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The completed face drawn on the corridor wall in pale orange plasma cutter lines. Vasquez sits back on her heels and looks at it in the near dark. Her posture is still, the plasma cutter now resting across her knee. She raises 2 fingers and touches the wall at the center of the face, not tracing the lines, just contact. Her expression is not grief in any way the alien understands. It is the expression of a counting that does not intend to close. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez stands, picks up her weapon from the floor beside her, and walks back down the corridor toward the sealed section's interior. Her figure moves away from the viewer into the dim, amber-red glow of the section's emergency systems. The drawn face on the wall remains in the foreground, luminous, present, watching her go. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Serpentine Seth Kai, alone in the corridor, standing before the portrait on the wall. Pale blue-white monitor glow. Her coils are still, her crest ridge fully elevated. She is looking at the face on the wall, not analyzing, not noting. Her head is tilted at an angle her species reserves for things that will not categorize. Her notation device is in her manipulator, untouched. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The sealed section under heavy bombardment. The deck plating shutters, dust, and debris fall from the ceiling seams. Emergency lighting flickers. Vasquez stands at the center of the assembled survivors. 2 humans, 1 Lethvari, the Kethdara soldier, and the Serpentine Seth Kai with the young Vethrani trainee. Vasquez is speaking, her posture straight, gesturing to a hand-drawn schematic on the wall beside the dead crew member's portrait. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Serpentine Seth Kai presenting tactical analysis data, a holographic display projected from her personal diplomatic device showing structural failure timelines and probability cascades in Vethrani notation. Vasquez stands across from her, listening without interrupting, expression steady. The bombardment shutters are visible in the hologram stability. Seth Kai scale crests are elevated. The probability field reads 3.7%. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on Vasquez's face as she hears the 3.7% survival probability. Her expression does not change. Her eyes move from the holographic display to the corridor schematic. The amber light catches the scar tissue along her jaw. She says one word. In the background, the young Vethrani trainee's crests go flat with distress. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez addresses the assembled survivors in the sealed section. The 2 humans, the Lethvari with braced limbs, the 4-eyed Kethdara, the young Vethrani trainee pressed against Seth Kai. She is not giving a speech. She is issuing logistics. Her hands move to the schematic, to the weapons console, to the barricade materials. Her face is calm, decisive, as if the math is a planning parameter and not a death sentence. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Kethdara soldier, gray-green scaled, four-eyed, shoulder now braced, steps forward from the wall and says 3 words. In the background, Vasquez nods once, short and decisive. The Lethvari contractor with broken limbs turns toward the monitoring station. The young human crew member who has shown high fear throughout begins moving toward the barricade materials alongside Vasquez. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Serpentine Vethrani diplomat Seth Kai stands in the sealed corridor with the young Vethrani trainee warm against her coils. Her stress musk is visible as a faint shimmer in the air near her secondary scent glands. Her scale crests are at maximum erection. Physically uncomfortable, her scales visibly straining. She is looking at a wall-mounted weapon rack holding a dead crew member sidearm. The weapon is worn at the grip points, smooth from use. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez turns from the barricade she's been constructing to look directly at Seth Kai. Her expression is open, not tactical, the same steady warmth that shows on infrared. She asks a question. The amber light catches her scar. In the background, the barricade takes shape, conduit, equipment cases, hole plating scraps. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on Seth Kai's face, triangular head, heat pit slits, iridescent green-black scale plates, and the particular tilt that her species uses when receiving information that doesn't fit any prior category. Her crest ridge is elevated. Her secondary manipulators are half raised in the gesture her species makes when the diplomatic response library returns no valid entries. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Serpentine Vethrani diplomat Seth Kai reaches toward the wall weapon rack and lifts a standard issue human sidearm in her secondary coils. The weapon sits heavy and strange in her grip, not designed for her anatomy, held in the adapted arrangement she uses for precision work. Her heat pit organs are focused on the weapon. Her crest ridge remains fully elevated. In the background, Vasquez at the barricade does not turn but registers the action with a slight shift of her head. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the human sidearm coiled in Seth Kai's secondary manipulators. The grip is worn smooth at the thumb rest and forward edge from hundreds of hours of habitual carry. Seth Kai's iridescent coils wrap carefully around it. The weight is visible in the tension of her coils. In the extreme background, Vasquez's hand points toward the weapon's left side without turning. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez at the barricade, back to Seth Kai, hands still working with conduit and hole plating. She speaks one sentence over her shoulder, pointing toward the weapon in Seth Kai's coils, without pausing her work or changing expression. The barricade in the amber light is taking a real shape, rough, improvised, functional. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The sealed section fortified for defense. Barricades at 2 of 4 approach corridors. The Kethdara soldier at the weapons console for eyes scanning sensor feeds. The Lethvari contractor at the monitoring station. The young human crew member stacking hull plating under Vasquez's direction. The Serpentine Seth Kai stands in the corridor's center with the weapon still in her coils, the young Vethrani trainee beside her. The face on the wall visible at the far end. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The sealed section during heavy bombardment. The station shudders with each strike, amber lights strobing, debris shaking free of ceiling panels. Vasquez moves from position to position, checking each defensive point, adjusting, correcting. She does not run. The deliberate pace is more unsettling than speed would be. The Serpentine Seth Kai tracks her movement with all available sensory organs. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Keth'Dara soldier at the weapons console. 4 eyes on the sensor feed, gray-green scaled hands on the targeting controls, adapted now to a console not built for his anatomy. He fires a counterpulse burst, an incoming probe. The weapons console lights his face in blue tactical light. Vasquez stands beside him, one hand on the console's edge, watching the sensor feed. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The young human crew member, the one who showed high fear throughout, is now moving with purpose, passing ammunition cells to Vasquez along the barricade line. His physiological fear response has not disappeared, but it is no longer driving him. His jaw is set. His eyes are clear. Seth Kai observes him from the corridor, something in her crest ridge shifting at this observation. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A heavy bombardment strike hits closer than previous ones. The sealed section's emergency bulkhead visibly strains, metal groaning, stress fractures appearing in the wall seam. One of the amber lights goes out. The survivors at their positions brace. Vasquez looks at the bulkhead damage assessment on her wrist unit, makes a calculation visible on her face, then turns back to her position without changing course. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The serpentine Seth Kai coiled in the sealed section's far end, the young Vethrani trainee pressed against her. Seth Kai holds the human sidearm in her secondary coils. She is running calculations visible only as the micro-movements of her heat pit organ focus, scanning, tabulating, rescanning. She reaches a number. Her crest ridge oscillates. She does not move toward the escape vector. She stays. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez and Seth Kai at adjacent positions during a lull in bombardment. Vasquez is checking the barricade integrity with her multi-tool. Seth Kai has moved to stand near the barricade line, not behind it, near it, with the weapon. Vasquez glances at her once, that slow nod again. Then back to the barricade. Neither says anything. The face on the wall is visible at the corridor's far end. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Exterior view through the sealed section's cracked viewport, the void beyond the station, and, in it, the Keth'Dara fleet vessels. Angular, dark, built for function without ornament, arrayed in bombardment formation. New ships are entering the sensor range from the opposite vector. Their configuration is different. Their approach vector is aimed not at the station, but at the Keth'Dara fleet. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The weapons console in the sealed section. The Keth'Dara soldiers' 4 eyes go wide at the sensor feed. The sensor display shows incoming contacts, many, moving with coordinated intent. The bombardment percussion has changed frequency. He turns to Vasquez. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The bombardment stops. The sealed section is abruptly, absolutely quiet. All the survivors register the silence differently. The Lethvari goes still. The young Vethrani trainee's crest drop flat. The young human crew member sags against the barricade. The Keth'Dara stands at the console with all 4 eyes on the sensor feed, and his jaw moving in slow rhythm. Vasquez looks at the ceiling once, a micro-expression that processes nothing visible, then turns to the room. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez stands at the structural integrity monitor in the sealed section, looking at the data readout. Her posture changes incrementally as she reads, a release of sustained load. She reaches out and puts one hand flat on the monitor housing, not pressing, just resting. Then she moves to the wall and sits down with her back against it. The amber light shows the full scope of exhaustion she has been carrying for 40 rotations and has not been spending until now. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Keth'Dara soldier at the weapons console, now observing the relief fleet's approach on the sensor feed. His 4 eyes are steady. His jaw still moves in the slow rhythm. In the quiet of the sealed section, with the bombardment stopped, his profile has a different quality. Not enemy, not prisoner. Something that has been through the same wall and come out the other side. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The sealed section survivors resting in the aftermath. The young human crew member slumped against the barricade, eyes closed. The HFY contractor still at their monitoring station, motionless with the stillness of near unconsciousness. The young Vethrani trainee curled against Seth Kai's coils, crests finally, flat and still. Seth Kai alone is fully alert, the weapon still in her coils, watching the structural integrity monitor. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Relief team cutting through the emergency bulkhead from outside. Bright cutting torchlight in a ring around the bulkhead seam. White and blue against the amber interior. The survivors in the sealed section react to the light differently. The young human crew member wakes and sits up. The Kethdara turns from the console. Seth Kai's heat pit organs register the thermal bloom of the cutter as overwhelming compared to the section's managed darkness. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The emergency bulkhead opens. Relief team medics in full gear enter with bright portable lighting that makes the amber emergency ambience suddenly archaic. Fresh air from outside. The smell of unrecycled atmosphere fills the sealed section. The young Vethrani trainees' crests rise slightly at the new scent. Vasquez remains seated against the wall. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The young human crew member, the one with the fear response, the one who flew the drone, is helped out through the opening bulkhead by two relief medics. His face, visible over a medic's shoulder, is wet. He is not resisting. He is crying in the way that bodies do when the stored response finds its moment. Not performance, just physics. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The HFY contractor moves through the bulkhead opening under their own power, 3 brace limbs, and 1 functional one, declining assistance with the body language of something that has decided. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The serpentine Seth Kai moves through the bulkhead opening with the young Vethrani trainee beside her. She still holds the human sidearm in her secondary coils. The bright relief team lighting is overwhelming after the amber dark, her heat pit organs registering overload. Her scale crests flutter as she adjusts. The weapon in her coils catches the new light. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Kethdara soldier stands in the bulkhead opening, facing the relief fleet commander, a tall alien in a different uniform configuration, and delivers formal surrender in compressed syntax. His 4 eyes are steady. His posture is correct. Then, he adds a sentence outside the formal syntax, and his 4 eyes briefly break from the commander to find Vasquez's position in the room. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez, still seated against the wall, as the Kethdara names her to the relief fleet commander. The commander turns to look at her. Vasquez looks up from her position on the floor, sidearm across her knees, expression measuring the room's new logistics. She says 2 words. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vasquez being lifted onto a stretcher by 2 relief medics. She is horizontal, not walking, and the medics have the practiced body language of people who won the argument. Her eyes are open and looking at the ceiling as she is carried toward the bulkhead opening. The amber emergency lighting mixes with the white relief team lighting, 2 eras overlapping. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The serpentine Seth Kai turns back in a corridor as Vasquez is carried past on the stretcher. The 2 figures are framed in the corridor. Vasquez horizontal in medic hands, Seth Kai coiled, scale crests fully elevated, the weapon still in her secondary manipulators. The face on the wall is visible at the corridor's far end, still luminous, still present. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on Vasquez's face from the stretcher, looking at Seth Kai. She says 2 words. Her expression is not commanding, not grateful. It is the expression of someone encountering a fact and acknowledging it plainly. The amber light catches her scar for the last time in the station. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The serpentine Seth Kai alone in the corridor after Vasquez has been carried past. The relief team moves beyond her in both directions. The face on the wall is still there. Seth Kai is still holding the weapon. Her heat pit organs take in the mixed lighting, amber emergency, and white relief team, processing it all. Her notation device is in her free manipulator, untouched. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A Vethrani diplomatic office aboard a relief vessel or station. Curved walls, the specific ergonomic geometry that accommodates serpentine bodies. Ambient light, in the cool spectrum Vethrani prefer. Seth Kai is coiled at a workstation, a 37-field diplomatic report form displayed on a translucent holographic interface in Vethrani notation. Field 14 is visible, cursor blinking. Her secondary manipulators are raised over the input surface but have not touched it. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the holographic report Field 14 in Vethrani notation. Partially typed text. Deleted text visible as a lighter ghost beneath the active line. The cursor blinks. Seth Kai's reflection is faint in the holographic surface. Her scale crests elevated even here, even now, even alone. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The human sidearm resting on the surface beside Seth Kai's workstation in the Vethrani diplomatic office. The worn grip points. The thumb rest indentation. The weapon is out of place in the ordered ergonomics of the Vethrani workspace. A human-scale object in a space not built for human proportions. Seth Kai's coils are partially touching it. Her heat pit organs are focused on it. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The serpentine Vethrani diplomat Seth Kai coiled before her holographic report form. The completed Field 14 visible. Text that reads as insufficient, that ends without the right word. Her scale crests are still elevated. The room is still. She has sent the report. The holographic send confirmation glyph hovers at the form's edge. Now she opens a secondary file. Smaller, encrypted, no header. She holds her input manipulator above it. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Vethrani personal notation file on the holographic interface. One word written, Vethsaral. The word in Vethrani notation glows briefly before Seth Kai strikes through it with a single input gesture, the notation equivalent of a crossout. The cross-through word remains visible beneath the line. The cursor moves below it to a blank field. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The holographic notation file with 2 lines, the crossed-out word, and below it, the new entry in the small, precise notation script Seth Kai learned before she could speak. The human sidearm sits beside the workstation. The room is still. The ambient Vethrani lighting is cool and rational. Seth Kai's crest ridge has finally dropped from full erect to a mid-position she has not occupied since before the attack. Not calm, but no longer in crisis. Changed. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Wide shot. The trading station exterior in the void, partially damaged. Hull scoring and structural deformation visible on the lower sections near the docking ring. The Kethdara fleet has withdrawn. Their exhaust signatures are fading. The relief fleet is stationed nearby. Lights active. One section of the station is dark. Another section's emergency lighting still glows amber through a line of viewports. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The corridor within the sealed section, now empty of survivors but before repair crews have arrived. The emergency lighting still amber. The barricades still standing. The weapons console still showing the last sensor feed. And on the far wall, the face drawn in plasma cutter lines. A human man, middle age, a small scar on his chin, rendered in detail. The drawing glows faintly orange against the gray metal. Is still there. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.